The hilltop rose above the Pacific like a forgotten fragment of another world, a place where the wind traveled without borders and the horizon stretched so far that even the sea seemed unsure where to end. Long before towers pierced the sky or marble statues glimmered in the sun, San Simeon was nothing more than a rugged, wild elevation bristling with chaparral and silent oak groves. It was the kind of land that resisted ownership, a place whose only architecture was weather and time. Yet this quiet crest, scorched by summer heat and softened by evening fog, would one day cradle one of the most extravagant estates ever built in America. And the person destined to reshape it first encountered this very hill not as a wealthy magnate, but as a boy with more imagination than direction. William Randolph Hearst's earliest memories of San Simeon were woven from camping tents, flickering lanterns, and the rustle of horses moving through tall summer grass. His parents brought him here during long excursions across the family's vast ranch lands, and while adults saw a practical campsite, the child saw a kingdom waiting for a ruler. He would scramble up the slopes, stopping only to gaze over the endless blue where the Pacific crashed in bright white ribbons against the cliffs far below. At night, when the air cooled and the coastline turned to silver, he lay awake listening to the distant thunder of the waves, imagining a fortress high above the water, with windows that caught the moonlight and towers that could see from one end of the world to the other. He did not yet know how deeply those early visions would take root inside him. To William, San Simeon was not empty land. It was a promise. The hilltop held something other places did not, a sense of scale, of possibility, of mystery. While other children played with toys, he studied the silhouette of the mountains and the sweep of the coast as if the land itself were speaking to him. His mother, Phoebe, encouraged his curiosity, pointing out constellations overhead, explaining the difference between wind-carved stones and tide-worn cliffs, telling him that beauty was something a person could spend a lifetime pursuing. She had no way of knowing that her words would one day return to this hill in the form of stone walls, carved ceilings, and glittering pools. Years passed, and Hearst's world expanded into something far grander than these quiet ridges. Europe filled his imagination with palaces and cathedrals whose scale seemed impossible to match. His father's businesses built an empire beneath his feet. His newspapers would soon shape the mood of entire cities. But through it all, the memory of this lonely California hilltop and the boy who once stood on it remained tucked away like a secret map he never forgot how to read. Even when he walked through the marble halls of Versailles or climbed the spiral staircases of Spanish fortresses, a small part of him compared every view to those first sunsets over San Simeon. Decades later, when the weight of success pressed on him and the noise of cities felt too loud, Hearst returned to the coast. The road up the mountain was rough and winding, just as he remembered. The hilltop was still wild, still windswept, still carrying the same untamed energy that had once enchanted him as a child. Each step he took felt like a conversation with the past. He paused often, not because of age, but because he recognized the faint outline of old campsites, the patterns of trails he had once followed barefoot, the way the wind curled around the ridge before spilling toward the sea. From that height, the world unfolded in a panorama of astonishing calm, rolling hills, silver waves, and an atmosphere so clear it seemed almost unreal. Hearst stood for a long time, letting silence settle over him. The land had not changed much, but he had. Now he possessed the means, the experience, and the ambition to turn a childhood fantasy into something tangible. He no longer imagined just a fortress of stone. He imagined a legacy, a sanctuary in the clouds, a monument large enough to match the dreams that had shaped him. The decision did not come with drama or declaration. It felt more like a reunion, as if the hill had been waiting patiently for him to return and listen again. And as he watched the Pacific fade into gold beneath the lowering sun, he understood with absolute clarity that this place, the campsite of his youth, the slope where he first learned to dream, would become the foundation of his greatest creation. The boy who once slept beneath the stars was now ready to build something that could reach them. Everything that followed, the letters, the blueprints, the towers, the pools, the grand halls shimmering with art, began in that single moment of recognition on the summit. The Enchanted Hill had called him home, and he answered the way only a man driven by vision could, by reshaping the land into a castle that would stand long after he was gone, a testament not to power, but to imagination. The morning light over San Simeon carried a quiet clarity when the idea that had lived inside Hearst since childhood finally took shape in words. It happened without ceremony, no audience, no dramatic flourish, only a brief letter written in the same tone one might use to request a simple garden wall or a small guest room. He addressed it to Julia Morgan, the architect he trusted above all others, a woman whose precision and resilience matched the scale of his imagination. "I would like to build a little something on the hill," he wrote, as if the hill were an ordinary place and his vision just another modest addition. Yet those few casual lines carried the weight of a lifetime. They marked the moment when a dream that had slept quietly since boyhood began to reach upward like the first stone of a tower. Julia Morgan read the letter with a practiced calm, but as soon as she arrived at San Simeon, she understood that nothing about the project would be little. The hill rose sharply, a spine of rugged earth standing more than 1,000 feet above the Pacific, its slopes carved by wind and years of isolation. From the summit, the world opened in all directions. Coastline to the west, rolling ranch land to the east, mountains marching toward the horizon. It was a place that demanded vision, not modesty. And even before Hearst voiced a single grand idea, Morgan recognized a truth that would shape the next 3 decades. The hill itself was too magnificent for anything small. Before plans could be drawn, the land had to be tamed. The summit was wild and unprepared for construction, with steep inclines and no stable paths to bring even the simplest materials upward. Teams of workers began carving switchback roads along the hillside, sculpting a path wide enough for trucks that did not yet exist in the region. Dust rose in long plumes behind the first vehicles that ventured up the twisting trail, marking the beginning of a transformation that would soon accelerate beyond anyone's expectations. What had once been the route for horseback rides became the backbone of a future architectural marvel. Water was next. The hill had none, and without water, nothing could be built. Not concrete, not gardens, not pools, not even a temporary camp for the workers. Morgan's engineers surveyed springs miles away, tracing a network of hidden sources through the mountains. Pipes were laid across uneven terrain, merging natural resources with human ambition. As the water finally reached the summit, it signaled more than progress. It marked the first triumph over a site that seemed determined to challenge every assumption. Electricity followed, carried by generators loud enough to echo across the valley. Light flickered into life in makeshift construction tents, long before there were walls or windows to contain it. At night, the hilltop appeared like a small settlement of glowing lanterns suspended above the sea, an early hint of the brilliance that would one day blaze from the finished estate. Workers described the place as a frontier town perched on the edge of the sky, half wilderness, half rising empire. Though the letter had spoken of something modest, Hearst's imagination refused restraint. Each time Morgan returned with updated sketches, he saw possibilities that expanded before her pencil could even finish outlining them. He wanted terraces that overlooked the ocean, courtyards bright with Mediterranean light, towers that evoked the cathedrals of Spain, and guest houses that felt like independent palaces. One idea led to another, and every revision pushed the project further into unknown architectural territory. A small retreat became a grand estate. A hilltop shelter became a future landmark. Morgan never protested. She absorbed Hearst's evolving dreams with steady professionalism, adapting each surge of inspiration into precise lines and structural logic. She understood that the hill had awakened something in him, something larger than ambition. An emotional return to the spark that had shaped his youth. And though her blueprints grew thicker with every passing month, she approached each change not as an obstacle but as a challenge worthy of her training. Meanwhile, construction pushed outward and upward, roads thickened, retaining walls grew stronger, and the summit gradually shifted from a rough plateau to the prepared foundation of a monumental undertaking. Nothing about the process resembled the early promise of simplicity. The land itself felt as though it had surrendered to a force of will that refused to compromise. By the time the first stone was laid, the truth was undeniable. This was no longer a hill waiting for a little something. It was the beginning of an architectural odyssey, an evolving vision that would reshape the skyline, challenge every convention, and ultimately define an era. The letter had been simple. The dream it unleashed would be anything but. Julia Morgan approached architecture the way a composer approaches a symphony, precisely, patiently, and with a vision that unfolded far beyond the first note. Long before her path crossed with Hearst's, she had cultivated a discipline that set her apart in a field dominated almost entirely by men. While others relied on grand declarations or extravagant signatures, she relied on the quiet certainty of skill. Her lines were meticulous, her structures resilient, her imagination grounded in logic, yet unafraid of ambition. She had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, a fortress of classical education that had resisted female admission for centuries, and she remained there until they finally accepted her, not because rules had changed, but because she had worn down every barrier with sheer persistence. When she returned to California, she brought with her not only European precision, but an understanding of how buildings should breathe, shift, and withstand the pressures of time. Morgan's style was a rare blend of engineering strength and artistic intuition. She favored reinforced concrete at a time when many dismissed it as inelegant, yet she shaped it into forms that carried both grace and might. Her structures were not simply designed to stand. They were designed to endure earthquakes, storms, and the unpredictable moods of the California coastline. She believed that beauty meant nothing without durability, and durability meant nothing without beauty. That philosophy would become the backbone of everything she created at San Simeon. When she first set foot on the windswept summit where Hearst wanted his little something, she studied the land with the calm attentiveness of someone listening for a melody. The hill was steep, the wind fierce, the soil unreliable, yet none of this discouraged her. Instead, each challenge seemed to sharpen her focus. She walked the perimeter, measuring with her eyes, imagining where weight could be anchored, how the contours might dictate the placement of future walls, and where views should be framed rather than conquered. She understood immediately that this project would demand her full range of skills. She also understood that Hearst was not a client who would settle for limitations. Their partnership formed in the space between his imaginative impulse and her practical brilliance. Hearst generated ideas with the speed of a man trying to build everything he had ever seen or admired. Morgan absorbed them, filtered them through structural logic, and returned them transformed into working designs. He showed her sketches of European palaces he adored, ceilings from Florence, arcades from Spain, courtyards drenched in the warm light of the Mediterranean. She studied each reference without copying it, analyzing what truly made those spaces powerful and translating their essence rather than their decoration. To him, she turned dreams into architecture. To her, he provided an endless stream of puzzles to solve. She faced skepticism throughout the early phases of planning. Suppliers questioned taking direction from a woman. Foremen doubted her ability to lead crews on a construction project of unprecedented scale. Even colleagues whispered that no single architect could manage so many layers of design, engineering, and logistics at once. Morgan ignored every doubt. Each obstacle only strengthened her resolve, and as the months progressed, the hilltop began to transform according to her drawings. Roads curling up the slopes, stone foundations setting firmly into the earth, and the first sketches of towers rising from her drafting table. Hearst visited frequently, sometimes with new antiques he wanted incorporated into the design: an imported ceiling, a carved fireplace, a set of bronze doors from a forgotten European chateau. She never flinched. Instead, she measured, recalculated, and redrew until the old seamlessly merged with the new. Their work sessions often stretched deep into the night, her calm focus balancing his restless exuberance. Despite their opposite temperaments, a profound respect grew between them. He trusted her judgment even when it contradicted his impulses, and she recognized in him a drive that matched her own dedication to craft. The earliest blueprints multiplied until they filled entire rooms, layer upon layer of evolving plans, each revision pushing the boundaries of what the hill could support. Morgan worked through them with the precision of a surgeon and the imagination of an artist, shaping a structure that could bear the weight of Hearst's ambitions without losing its integrity. Every line on her paper was placed with purpose, each calculation exact, and each detail aligned with a greater vision that neither of them could fully articulate yet, but both sensed growing steadily around them. By the time the first outlines of the estate emerged, it was clear that no other architect could have managed such a volatile blend of artistry, engineering, and constant reinvention. Morgan didn't simply build what Hearst asked for. She built what the land demanded, what the structure required, and what the dream needed to remain possible. The impossible was not simply achieved, it was made inevitable under her guidance, as if the hill itself had been waiting for her all along. The first signs of transformation appeared quietly on the hill, long before the world heard the name La Cuesta Encantada. What had once been an untouched summit, nothing more than wind, rock, and wild grass, began to echo with the mechanical rhythm of work crews carving their way upward. Trucks rattled along the newly cut switchback road, their engines straining as they climbed toward a place that only two people on Earth truly understood. The hill, which had spent centuries resisting change, now felt the weight of ambition pressing into its soil. To build anything on such steep terrain required more than blueprints. It required reimagining the landscape itself. The earliest foundations were not for houses, but for stability. Retaining walls rose like stone ribs along the slopes, anchoring the future structure into the mountain. Massive trenches were dug for water lines and power conduits, forming an underground network essential to sustaining life at the summit. Workers hauled concrete mixers, generators, and lumber up the winding ascent, turning the hilltop into a settlement that looked more like a frontier outpost than the birthplace of a future palace. Material from across California, and soon from across the world, began arriving by the truckload. Timber stacked in long rows waited under canvas tarps. Stone blocks, too heavy for any single crane to manage alone, were unloaded with winches and sliding rails. Crates filled with tiles, wrought iron fixtures, and carved wooden panels stood temporarily among piles of gravel. Even these early deliveries hinted at the scale of what was coming. The hill did not merely host a building site, it hosted a dream accelerating into reality. Yet, Julia Morgan knew that no project of such magnitude could begin with the main house. Casa Grande would require engineering finesse on a scale unprecedented for a private residence. Before attempting anything so enormous, she proposed a practical, strategic approach. Test the hill's capabilities by erecting 3 smaller residences, guest houses that would serve as laboratories for design, structure, and logistics. Hearst agreed instantly, not because he sought caution, but because the idea offered momentum. He wanted to see visible progress, something rising from the dust that confirmed the hill had accepted its destiny. The first structure, Casa del Mar, stood on a western terrace that opened directly toward the breaking waves far below. Its white walls gleamed in the sun, a sharp contrast to the rugged coastline. Inside, tiled floors echoed Spanish courtyards, while carved ceilings from Europe cast shadows shaped by centuries of craftsmanship. The house became a living example of how Morgan could merge imported history with California light. Not far above it, Casa del Monte began to take form on a higher plateau, its orientation chosen to capture the changing colors of the inland hills. The house looked toward the mountains rather than the sea, reminding guests that the estate commanded 2 worlds at once. Here, the challenges of elevation, wind patterns, and foundation depth became clear, and Morgan refined her technical approach accordingly. Casa del Sol followed next, positioned to drink in the afternoon brightness. Sunlight cascaded across its terraces, flooding rooms filled with Italian lanterns, Spanish tiles, and stone archways that made visitors forget they stood on a hill once known only to ranchers and storms. Each of the 3 guest houses, though smaller than what was yet to come, carried a distinct personality. Together they formed a miniature village suspended between sky and sea, a preview of the magnificence that would soon dominate the summit. As the trio of guest houses neared completion, the hill grew louder and busier. Their presence proved that the terrain could support substantial structures, that the materials could survive the elevation, and that Morgan's design language could unfold seamlessly across multiple buildings. Workers moved from one site to another with growing confidence. They laid stone pathways, built retaining steps between levels, and installed early lighting systems that glimmered against the dark mountainside at night like scattered lanterns guiding future travelers upward. The guest houses became the first inhabitable test of Hearst's grand ambitions. Before Casa Grande even existed on paper in its full form, Visitors were already arriving, stepping into homes that felt as if they had been transported from Renaissance Europe by some impossible force. They slept under ceilings centuries old, awoke to the sound of the Pacific, and dined on terraces that captured the shifting moods of the California coast. The hill, which had once been silent, now buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the excitement of witnessing something extraordinary take shape. And beneath all of it, the walls, the terraces, the imported artifacts, the workers moving like an orchestra, lay the earliest heartbeat of the estate that would one day be known as the Enchanted Hill. The three guest houses were not mere residences. They were the opening chapters of a monumental narrative. They proved that the impossible could be built here. They gave Hearst the confidence to aim even higher, and they set the stage for a structure so vast and intricate that it would redefine the hill forever. The three guest houses that emerged on the slopes of San Simeon were never meant to be temporary structures or simple accommodations. From the moment their foundations settled into the earth, they carried an unexpected presence, as if each one were a small palace placed deliberately to test the limits of what the hill could hold. Their role was practical, but their impact was transformative. Before the grand towers of Casa Grande even existed in concept, these smaller residences established the aesthetic, rhythm, and emotional identity of the entire estate. Casa del Mar appeared first, standing like a white sentinel above the Pacific. From its terraces, the ocean unfolded in a shimmering panorama, the horizon stretching far beyond the curve of the earth. Morgan designed it to embrace the coastline, shaping its rooms to capture natural light that drifted through arched windows framed in imported stone. Inside, antique ceilings reclaimed from old European estates cast elaborate patterns across the walls, while Spanish tiles added warmth beneath the feet of early visitors. Every detail gave the impression of a home carved from the memory of a Mediterranean castle and adapted to the vibrancy of California's climate. Casa del Mar became the first statement of elegance on a hill that had known nothing but rugged solitude. Higher on the slope, Casa del Monte took a different character. Facing inward toward the mountains, it mirrored the colors and textures of the inland landscape. Its design felt more secluded, almost introspective, a retreat shaped for guests who sought quiet or contemplation. Heavy carved doors opened into rooms lit by soft, diffused light, filtered through wooden beams and tapestries collected by Hearst during his decades of travel. The terraces here overlooked rolling hills that glowed gold at sunset, creating a sense of serene grandeur that balanced the dramatic energy of the ocean view below. Then came Casa del Sol, positioned deliberately to absorb the full warmth of the afternoon. This residence felt the most playful of the three, awash in sunlight that danced across its patios and courtyards. Bright tiles, delicate ironwork, and vibrant mosaic patterns brought a sense of Mediterranean optimism to the hillside. Guests who stayed here described the house as a place where the day seemed to linger, where shadows moved slowly and the air smelled of warm stone and sea breeze. Casa del Sol felt alive, reflecting Hearst's fondness for spaces that encouraged conversation, celebration, and a touch of spectacle. Although each guest house had its own personality, together they formed an architectural language, an early chorus that previewed the scale and spirit of the entire estate. Their interiors showcased Hearst's collecting habits: Renaissance tables, Gothic fireplaces, glasswork from Venice, tapestries older than the United States itself. Morgan found ways to blend these historical pieces into rooms that felt cohesive rather than crowded, allowing each artifact to breathe without overwhelming the design. It was here, in these first finished spaces, that Hearst and Morgan discovered their shared ability to merge centuries of artistic traditions into a fresh California identity. As the houses reached completion, guests began to arrive, many of them luminaries from the growing spheres of publishing, politics, and early Hollywood. They rode up the winding road in open cars, astonished to find European craftsmanship atop a windswept California ridge. They dined on terraces washed in golden light, wandered through rooms filled with treasures, and slept beneath ceilings brought from distant chapels and manors. Word spread quickly that something extraordinary was unfolding on the hill, a private world unlike anything seen on the West Coast. Their reactions thrilled Hearst. The guest houses validated his ambition, showing him that the hill could support not just beauty, but grandeur, not just comfort, but spectacle. They also revealed something deeper. The land responded well to Morgan's vision. The materials held. The structures stood firm. The interplay of sunlight, stone, and space felt natural, almost inevitable. The small palaces were more than architectural experiments. They were proof that the impossible could be made real. With the guest houses thriving, the focus shifted upward to the highest point of the summit. Every terrace, every carved doorway, every imported artifact embedded into the walls served as a rehearsal for the masterpiece to come. The hill had accepted these first creations. Now it was ready for the main act, a residence so immense, so intricate, and so deeply tied to Hearst's imagination that it would dominate the skyline and reshape the identity of San Simeon forever. Casa Grande began as a silhouette in Hearst's imagination, a hybrid of every palace, cathedral, and fortress that had captivated him since childhood. But turning that boundless vision into stone required an engineering effort so ambitious that even seasoned builders paused when they first studied Julia Morgan's plans. The guest houses had proven that the hill could hold beauty. Casa Grande would test whether it could hold grandeur. Rising from the summit like a cathedral perched above the clouds, the main house demanded foundations far stronger than anything previously built on San Simeon. Morgan's team dug deep into the hilltop, carving out trenches that formed a skeletal grid beneath the future structure. Reinforced concrete became the hidden spine of the building, an innovative choice at the time, but one Morgan trusted implicitly. It allowed soaring towers, sweeping balconies, and floors heavy with imported stone to stand secure against the fierce coastal winds and the tremors of an unpredictable earth. The mountain, for the first time, felt the weight of a building designed not to sit on it, but to command it. As the first walls rose, Morgan refined the design in constant conversation with the surroundings. The towers, those iconic twin spires that would become the symbol of the entire estate, were shaped to echo Spanish cathedrals Hearst had admired during his European travels. Their vertical lines stretched toward the sky, interrupting the horizon with a determination that mirrored Hearst's own drive. Every arch, every carved niche, every stone banding contributed to a silhouette that looked ancient and modern at once, as if this hilltop had always been destined for such architecture. The materials came from every corner of the world. Ships unloaded crates at coastal docks, each container holding pieces of old Europe. Trucks carried them slowly up the winding road, columns from Mediterranean courtyards, marble slabs cut from Italian quarries, carved reliefs rescued from dismantled villas, and entire ceilings pried from the ruins of Spanish estates. Hearst approached building as a collector, acquiring not just artifacts, but architectural fragments that had witnessed centuries of history. To him, Casa Grande was not merely a residence. It was an anthology of civilizations told through stone and wood. In warehouses located miles away, workers unpacked treasures so varied that the rooms resembled miniature museums. Gothic beams hand-painted in the 15th century, Renaissance doorways adorned with floral carvings, bronze chandeliers heavy enough to require custom supports. Morgan carefully cataloged each piece, studying how it might integrate into the evolving structure. She refused to allow the mansion to become a patchwork. Every fragment needed purpose, every detail, a conversation with the space around it. The ceilings became masterpieces in themselves. Some were crafted on site by teams of artisans hired specifically for the project. Others traveled across oceans in fragile crates, wrapped in linen to protect centuries-old paint. Workers gently lifted them into place using block and tackle rigs, adjusting angles by fractions of inches until the panels settled perfectly into the rooms designed to honor them. Stepping into these spaces felt like entering different eras, each ceiling a portal to a distant past that Morgan and Hearst seamlessly wove into the narrative of the hill. Outside, stonecutters shaped limestone blocks that formed the outer walls, chiseling intricate details that caught afternoon light like lace carved into rock. The façade combined Mediterranean revival with hints of Gothic precision and Spanish Baroque, yet the result was neither imitation nor collage. It was a singular style born entirely on this hilltop. Casa Grande was not built to resemble Europe. It was built to reinvent it through California's lens. Hearst watched the construction unfold with restless enthusiasm. He arrived with new ideas almost daily, pacing the terraces, pointing toward the sky where he imagined another balcony or a taller tower. He carried photographs torn from books, sketches made hastily during sleepless nights, and fragments of inspiration pulled from his vast collection of art and architecture. Morgan listened patiently, absorbing his impulses and translating them into structural possibilities. Their collaboration became a constant exchange of imagination and discipline, each refining the other. By the time the upper floors rose into view, the building commanded the hill with unmistakable presence. Travelers along the coast could see its outline from miles away, white towers piercing the fog like beacons. Locals began calling it the castle before the word ever appeared in official descriptions. Casa Grande seemed to grow not outward from the earth, but upward towards something larger, an attempt to merge sky, sea, and stone into a single architectural gesture. Inside, the rooms multiplied until Casa Grande felt more like a village than a home. Libraries, dining halls, galleries, and suites unfolded with the rhythm of a labyrinth, each space unique yet connected through Morgan's meticulous design. The main living areas were planned around the interplay of light. Morning sun streaming through east-facing windows, afternoon glow bathing the courtyards, golden rays illuminating carved stone at dusk. The house seemed to shift personalities as the day progressed, its surfaces reacting to the changing sky. With each passing season, Casa Grande advanced closer to its final form. Workers swarmed the site day and night, installing woodwork, laying tiles, and hoisting monumental artworks into place. The hill, once a quiet geological outcrop, now pulsed with motion and purpose. The guest houses had introduced the idea of luxury, but Casa Grande embodied something entirely different, a vision too vast for modest words, a creation that blended art, engineering, and human stubbornness into a structure that dominated both the summit and the imagination. The heart of the estate had begun to beat. The silhouette that now crowned San Simeon was unmistakable, two towering spires rising over a mansion that seemed to hover between continents and centuries. Casa Grande did not simply appear on the hill, it claimed it, reshaping the skyline and announcing that the true era of the Enchanted Hill had begun. Stepping inside, Casa Grande felt like crossing a threshold where centuries intertwined so seamlessly that time itself seemed to hesitate. The mansion did not reveal its grandeur all at once. It unfolded gradually, like a story told, room by room. Every corridor, every gallery, every staircase opened into a world shaped by a different mood, a different era, a different artistic language. Yet beneath the beauty lay a hidden network of engineering decisions so advanced that the estate functioned not as a relic of the past, but as a prototype for the future. The main entrance led into a vast assembly room, its ceilings soaring overhead in carved panels rescued from a Renaissance palace. Light filtered through tall windows, glinting off tapestries woven in Flemish workshops centuries earlier. The room felt ancient, as if monks or noble families had once gathered there, but it hummed with electricity hidden behind the walls. This was the charm of Casa Grande. Every piece of ornamentation belonged to another time, but the structure that supported it belonged entirely to modern innovation. From the assembly room, guests wandered into an interconnected labyrinth of galleries. The refectory stretched out like a medieval banquet hall, its long table illuminated by flickering chandeliers shaped from bronze and iron. Decorative banners hung from the upper walls, recalling the heraldry of European courts, while modern heating ducts hidden behind carved wood panels ensured the space remained comfortable no matter the season. The effect was unsettling to some visitors. How could a hall that looked older than many European estates remain so effortlessly warm? Yet, that was the invisible brilliance of Morgan's engineering. The house was filled with echoes of the past, but none of its discomforts. Deeper inside, the Gothic library formed a sanctuary of quiet grandeur. Shelves lined with rare books rose toward a painted ceiling that had once belonged to a small Spanish chapel. The room felt suspended in old-world solemnity, yet electric reading lamps glowed softly next to armchairs, and a state-of-the-art ventilation system kept the pages from warping in the coastal humidity. No one who entered the library realized that beneath the floor, a network of cables and ducts made this preservation possible. The technology never intruded, it simply served. The secret heart of the mansion, however, lay in its hidden passages. Morgan designed discreet service corridors throughout the estate, allowing staff to move unseen, adjusting temperatures, lighting fireplaces, delivering trays, maintaining equipment. These narrow hallways threaded through the walls and under the floors like arteries, ensuring that the grand public rooms remained tranquil and undisturbed. Some passages connected directly to mechanical rooms, places no guest ever saw, where boilers, electrical panels, pumps, and filtration systems kept the mansion alive with quiet precision. Casa Grande appeared timeless, but behind its walls the machinery of the 20th century beat steadily. Elevators, rare luxury devices in private homes at the time, linked different levels of the mansion. They allowed guests to glide between floors without effort, and they allowed Hearst to place his most cherished suites high above the main gathering spaces without sacrificing accessibility. These elevators were disguised behind ornate woodwork, their mechanical sound softened to nearly nothing. Visitors often stepped inside believing they were entering another hallway, only to emerge moments later in an entirely different part of the castle. The plumbing system was equally advanced. Hot water flowed through copper pipes, insulated against temperature changes, ensuring every suite enjoyed modern comfort in a structure filled with antique stone and wood. Bathrooms featured marble basins, gold-trimmed fixtures, and tile work modeled after European bathhouses. Yet the water pressure rivaled that of the newest hotels. Engineers worked tirelessly to maintain these systems, quietly making adjustments in the hidden mechanical rooms, even as guests marveled at the mansion's historical ambiance. Everywhere one turned, the contrast between old and new created a sense of theatrical wonder. The billiard room, lined with dark Gothic panels and illuminated by moody lanterns, hid a complex electrical grid behind its carved walls. The movie theater, decorated like a jewel box, boasted projection equipment as cutting-edge as anything in Hollywood. Even the exterior walkways, mosaic paths lit by lanterns, were supported by reinforced concrete platforms designed to withstand coastal erosion and seismic movement. Casa Grande was more than an architectural display. It was an engineered marvel masked in historical costume. Morgan had found a way to let technology serve without ever being noticed, allowing Hearst's collection of ancient ceilings, marble fireplaces, and carved doors to coexist with conveniences that made the mansion one of the most comfortable residences in the country. The building breathed through its hidden systems, drawing warmth from boilers, pushing fresh air through ducts, and distributing light through a carefully planned electrical network that could be adjusted room by room. This harmony of ancient aesthetics and modern functionality became one of the estate's defining traits. Casa Grande felt like a place lifted from the pages of history, yet it operated with the ease of a contemporary estate. Visitors wandered through halls that whispered of past civilizations, without realizing that beneath the floors, pumps whirred, wires hummed, and the building's mechanical heart pulsed with steady, quiet life. As construction continued, the hidden systems expanded along with the mansion's growing wings. The house was not simply being built upward and outward, it was being built inside out, with engineering and artistry layered together so completely that one could not exist without the other. The result was a structure that could withstand time, weather, and the relentless ambitions of its creator. And as the mansion approached completion, it became clear that the interior world of Casa Grande was unlike anything else in America. It was a fusion of centuries, a place where history breathed through artifacts while the future hummed behind the walls. The hilltop that had once known only silence now sheltered a masterpiece that blended imagination with technology, creating a sanctuary that felt both eternal and alive. The pools of Hearst Castle were never intended as simple places to swim. They were conceived as experiences, architectural spectacles that blended mythology, engineering, and artistry into something that felt almost unreal against the wild California landscape. When the Neptune pool and the Roman pool finally emerged from years of design revisions, stone carving, and technical innovation, they became not just features of the estate, but symbols of its ambition. Even among the mansion's towering halls and historic treasures, these two bodies of water stood apart, radiating a grandeur that shifted the atmosphere of the entire hilltop. The Neptune pool began as a modest concept, nothing more than a simple outdoor basin overlooking the Pacific. Yet, as construction progressed and Hearst's imagination continued to expand, the pool transformed into a sprawling classical masterpiece. It sat on a broad terrace poised above the ocean, its water shimmering beneath colonnades modeled after ancient Greek and Roman temples. Italian artisans carved marble figures of nymphs, gods, and sea creatures that lined the edge of the pool, their pale stone glowing in the California light. Columns rose and rose, their reflections doubling in the water until the pool looked like a portal to another world. The engineering behind Neptune Pool was as impressive as its aesthetics. To create the illusion of a perfectly level surface, despite the uneven, sloping terrain, Morgan's team developed a sophisticated system of retaining walls and stepped basins concealed beneath the marble. Pumps and filtration devices hid in nearby chambers, ensuring the water remained crystal clear despite the estate's unpredictable coastal weather. The pool could be heated, illuminated, and drained with precision rare for its time. Every mechanical decision was tucked discreetly out of sight, preserving the pool's serene classical appearance. Guests who encountered Neptune Pool for the first time often stopped mid-step. Under bright midday sun, its water turned turquoise, framed by columns that seemed torn from an ancient civilization. At dusk, the marble deepened to a golden hue, and the pool became a stage where the last rays of sunlight performed their closing act. By night, with underwater lights glowing softly, the entire terrace seemed to float above the world. Some visitors described the scene as dreamlike. Others compared it to a film set. But for most, the impression was simple. This was a place where time felt suspended. The Roman pool, concealed within the main building, offered a strikingly different atmosphere. If Neptune Pool evoked the vastness of open skies and ancient temples, the Roman pool felt like a submerged cathedral carved from stars. Located beneath Casa Grande, it was a hidden treasure known only to those invited inside, a world of deep blue and gold that embraced visitors in shimmering quiet. More than 1 million glass mosaic tiles covered its walls, ceilings, and floors. Each tile was crafted to catch light at slightly different angles, creating a radiant glow that made the room appear illuminated from within. Inspired by the baths of Caracalla in Rome, the space combined classical motifs with an almost ethereal sense of mystery. Golden-tiled constellations glittered across the ceiling, their reflections trembling on the water's surface. Statues of Roman gods stood in alcoves, their reflections merging with their marble forms, until it was hard to tell where stone ended and water began. The pool's depth added to the illusion, almost 20 feet in places, making swimmers feel as though they were descending into a luminous underwater chamber. The engineering behind the Roman pool was equally precise. The heavy mosaic surfaces required reinforced supports to prevent shifting under the pool's immense weight. An intricate system of underwater lights was installed with painstaking care, illuminating the tiles so evenly that the pool glowed like a liquid gemstone. Temperature controls kept the water at an ideal warmth, allowing guests to glide through a mirrored world where every ripple created a dance of light along the walls. The complexity of the design was masked so flawlessly that most visitors never realized how deeply technology shaped their experience. When guests were escorted through the main hallways and descended the stairs into the Roman pool for the first time, reactions often fell into hushed awe. The shift from the bright California light to the cool, mosaic-darkened interior felt like entering a hidden sanctum. Voices softened, footsteps slowed, and conversations dissolved into whispers. It wasn't just the beauty that captivated them. It was the sense of stepping into a space untouched by the outside world, a sanctuary carved from light and stone. Together, the Neptune Pool and the Roman pool became more than architectural achievements. They became the emotional anchors of the estate. The Neptune Pool represented the splendor of daylight, open air, and the sweeping world beyond the hill. The Roman pool embodied depth, introspection, and the intoxicating allure of mystery. Visitors moved between the two, as though passing between two dimensions of the same dream. These pools elevated the entire identity of the estate, not merely as a home, but as a realm shaped by imagination. They set a standard of luxury that echoed far beyond San Simeon, influencing designers, filmmakers, artists, and travelers for generations. And as the estate continued to grow, these aquatic masterpieces remained central to its legend. symbols of what happens when creative ambition meets architectural genius in a place where the sky, the sea, and the land all seem to hold their breath. The land surrounding the mansion transformed as dramatically as the buildings themselves. What had once been a rugged hilltop, overgrown with scrub and wind-stunted oaks, evolved into a tapestry of terraces, gardens, and pathways that felt as curated as any room inside Casa Grande. Julia Morgan and Hearst approached the outdoors with the same precision they brought to architecture. Every line of hedging, every twist of a walkway, every cluster of flowers chosen not just for appearance but for how they interacted with light, weather, and the rhythm of the estate. The hill became a living extension of the mansion, a landscape designed to breathe, evolve, and astonish. Stone staircases curved around slopes like ribbons, connecting terraces carved into the hillside. Each level offered a different view. Some opened toward the endless Pacific, others faced the rolling inland mountains, and some framed the grand towers rising above them. Mediterranean gardens filled these terraces with citrus trees, jasmine, and clipped boxwood hedges. Imported palms swayed beside fountains that spilled water into basins carved from marble, their quiet splash carried on the breeze. Paths lined with cypress trees created corridors of shade, guiding visitors toward hidden alcoves where benches invited them to linger, with the ocean stretching out below. Fountains played a central role in shaping the hill's atmosphere. Some gurgled softly from beneath tiled mosaics. Others shot delicate arcs of water across sunlit patios. Hearst collected fountainheads as passionately as he collected ceilings and tapestries, stone faces, mythical creatures, and carved shells that once adorned European estates now found new life on the terraces of San Simeon. These water features animated the gardens, filling the air with motion and sound, softening the vastness of the landscape into something intimate and enchanting. But even the most elaborate fountains could not compete with the element of surprise that roamed freely across the estate. The idea of a private zoo started almost casually. Hearst had long been fascinated by animals, creatures that symbolized strength, rarity, or simple wonder. He began acquiring exotic species from around the world, and soon the hilltop evolved into the largest private zoological collection in existence. While the mansion rose in stone and marble, the surrounding hills filled with life. Zebras grazed in open fields, their black and white stripes cutting sharply against the golden grass. Antelope leaped gracefully across distant ridges. Ostriches strutted along the lower slopes, their feathers rippling in the coastal wind. Giraffes stretched their necks toward branches that would have been impossible to reach without the help of the land's natural rise. Camels, kangaroos, and even bison moved across pastures bordered not by cages, but by rolling hills. The animals were not kept as spectacle, but as part of the hill's personality, a dynamic, unpredictable element that made the estate feel alive in a way no architecture alone could achieve. For visitors arriving by car from the train station below, the journey to the top became its own performance. As they ascended the long, winding road, they encountered sights that felt almost surreal: a zebra crossing the path, a group of elk grazing beside a fountain, peacocks flashing their feathers as they wandered between palm trees. Every turn revealed something unexpected, as if the hill were introducing itself before guests ever reached the front steps of Casa Grande. The experience blurred the line between estate and wilderness. The hill was cultivated, yet it retained its primal spirit. Landscape architects worked tirelessly to maintain this carefully controlled wildness. Gardens required constant attention, pruning, watering, replanting, to ensure they flourished despite the coastal climate. Trails were reshaped after storms, terraces reinforced where the hillside shifted. Yet the result never felt manicured. Instead, it felt like an idealized version of nature, a world where fountains and wildlife existed in harmony, each enhancing the presence of the other. This outdoor realm created an atmosphere that guests carried with them when they entered the mansion. The sounds of distant animals lingered in their ears. The smell of citrus and sea breeze clung to their clothes. The views of the hills and coast remained imprinted in their minds. By the time they crossed the threshold into the assembly room, or wandered into the refectory, they felt as though they had stepped not just into a home, but into an entire world, one shaped by beauty, order, and the subtle pulse of untamed nature. The gardens and the zoo were not mere embellishments. They were essential threads in the identity of the Enchanted Hill, weaving together landscape, architecture, and imagination. And as guests carried the memory of that ascent into the mansion, they were already immersed in the dream Hearst and Morgan had crafted. A dream that would deepen even further once they experienced life inside those stone walls. Life inside the estate unfolded with the rhythm of a world that seemed to operate according to its own quiet laws. A world suspended above the ordinary, shaped not only by architecture, but by the cadence of daily routines that gave the hilltop its pulse. Casa Grande never felt static. It breathed through its people. It hummed with footsteps across tiled floors, conversations drifting through archways, laughter echoing in distant galleries. The mansion functioned less like a private residence, and more like a small, self-contained city with Hearst as its orchestrator, shaping every movement within its walls. Each day began slowly, in part because Hearst himself preferred a late start. Breakfast rarely appeared before mid-morning, arranged in a small dining room rather than the grand refectory where larger meals were held. Guests filtered in wearing robes or casual clothes, taking seats beneath antique wood beams while the morning sun slipped through stained glass windows. Conversations started softly, murmurs about the weather, plans for horseback rides, or which part of the estate they planned to explore. Staff moved discreetly through hidden corridors, delivering trays and adjusting details without ever disturbing the calm atmosphere. By midday, the estate shifted into a livelier gear. Lunch was served promptly at 1 o'clock in the refectory, where the long table ran almost the entire length of the hall. Banners hung above like silent witnesses to the mixture of elegance and ease that characterized meals at the castle. Despite the grandeur of the surroundings, the carved choir stalls, the imported ceilings, the medieval tapestries, Hearst preferred simple American food. Guests might sit beneath centuries-old Flemish artwork while eating bowls of fruit, fried chicken, or sandwiches prepared in expansive kitchens bustling beneath the floors. The juxtaposition delighted some visitors and confounded others, but it always left an impression. The castle was a place where history and informality coexisted. The social order of the estate followed an unspoken discipline that gave structure to the day. Hearst expected guests to be present for meals, to participate in the evening gatherings, and to treat the schedule with the respect due to a host who provided everything one could desire. The rules were never severe, but they were consistent. Alcohol was limited to maintain a controlled, harmonious atmosphere. Excessive indulgence was quietly discouraged. Hearst valued conversation, creativity, and the sense of being part of a shared, elevated experience, an atmosphere he curated as carefully as the architecture itself. Afternoons scattered the guests across the property like actors stepping into different scenes. Some ventured into the gardens or rode horses along mountain trails. Others lounged near the Neptune pool, watching sunlight ripple across the marble colonnades. A few slipped into the billiard room, where the deep colors and Gothic decor created a cocoon of camaraderie. Staff members moved constantly through the estate's unseen channels, maintaining the illusion that the castle operated effortlessly. In reality, dozens of people worked behind the scenes, ensuring that every door, light, and meal aligned precisely with the rhythm of the day. As evening approached, the social energy shifted toward anticipation. Guests gathered in the assembly room before dinner, surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the grandeur of historic tapestries. The air filled with voices, the rustle of formal attire, and the faint aroma of the sea carried in by the evening breeze. When the double doors to the refectory opened, the transition felt ceremonial. Dinner itself unfolded with a balance of elegance and relaxation, often lasting for hours as guests traded stories, debated ideas, or simply enjoyed the atmosphere. But the true heart of the evening waited beyond the hall. Hearst guided guests toward the private theater, a plush, intimate room lined with deep red chairs and illuminated by soft golden light. Here, he screened movies long before they were shown to the public, sometimes featuring the very stars sitting in the audience. The sound of the projector winding, the glow of the silver screen, and the muffled laughter that rose during light-hearted films created a sense of shared enchantment. Watching a movie here was more than entertainment. It was a ritual, a moment when the castle seemed to fold inward and draw everyone close. Once the film ended, the estate exhaled again into the cool night. Guests stepped onto terraces where the Pacific shimmered beneath moonlight. Music drifted from somewhere inside, a piano, a gramophone, or simply someone humming a tune. Conversations lingered in hallways, voices softened by fatigue and contentment. Some returned to their suites, pausing to admire the towers illuminated against the dark sky. Others continued talking in the billiard room or walked quietly along the garden paths. Through it all, the castle remained alert, sustained by the invisible machinery of staff and systems that ensured every room stayed warm, every corridor lit, every detail maintained. Casa Grande operated with the precision of a palace but the intimacy of a home, shaped by Hearst's unwavering desire to create a world where beauty and order existed in perfect harmony. The hilltop's daily cycle never felt chaotic or rushed. Instead, it flowed with a deliberate rhythm that made guests feel as though they had stepped into a living organism, an environment that responded to their presence, guided their movements, and invited them to sink deeper into its atmosphere. By nightfall, when the last voices faded and only the calls of distant animals drifted across the terraces, the castle settled into a gentle calm. Even then, its lights glimmered softly across the hillside, signaling that the day's performance had ended, but the enchantment remained. And with the quiet came the sense that the estate was ready for the next dawn, the next conversation, the next arrival. Always alive, always aware, always waiting to begin the cycle anew. Casa Grande unfolded like a kingdom contained within walls, a world of 165 rooms, where each space carried a personality shaped by centuries of art, architecture, and the desires of the man who curated it. Walking through its corridors felt like moving through an encyclopedia of global history, yet everything was arranged with the intimacy of a lived-in home. The mansion did not simply store artifacts, it performed them. Every ceiling, every carved panel, every tile served a purpose within a larger narrative, creating a place that felt simultaneously ancient and astonishingly alive. Hearst and Morgan had built more than a residence. They had created a museum that breathed, a gallery disguised as a palace, a world where the past was not preserved behind glass, but lived through daily experience. One of the most striking rooms lay deep within the upper floors, the Gothic suite, Hearst's private sanctuary. Stepping into it meant entering a realm that looked older than the hill itself. Dark wood panels wrapped the walls like armor, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns softened by the glow of soft lamps. The ceiling rose overhead in a lattice of painted beams, imported from European manors that had witnessed centuries of history before arriving at San Simeon. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows in shades of ruby, gold, and sapphire, tinting the room with a solemn, otherworldly atmosphere. This was where Hearst read correspondence, reviewed manuscripts, and retreated from the constant flow of guests. The room reflected his seriousness, his fascination with medieval culture, and his lifelong devotion to collecting objects that carried the weight of time. The Gothic suite was not simply a bedroom, it was a fortress of solitude perched high above the ocean. Just down the hall, the tone changed entirely. Marion Davies' private rooms radiated a gentler, brighter charm that contrasted beautifully with Hearst's heavy Gothic world. Her suite, filled with French-inspired furniture, pastel fabrics, and sunlight that spilled through wide windows, felt like a breath of fresh air. Soft curtains drifted in the breeze, casting patterns across polished floors. Gold-framed mirrors caught the morning light and scattered it across delicate palettes of ivory and pale blue. Her bathroom gleamed with white marble, gold fixtures, and glass perfume bottles arranged with almost artistic care. Whereas Hearst's suite represented power and introspection, Marion's reflected warmth, ease, and laughter, the essence of her personality woven into every detail. Her rooms became a haven for those seeking lightness amid the castle's grandeur, reminding visitors that, even within a monumental estate, tenderness had its place. Beyond the private suites, the mansion's intellectual and social heart pulsed in the library. Lined with thousands of rare books gathered over decades, the room exuded quiet nobility. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes on history, politics, art, and architecture. Unlike many wealthy collectors who treated their libraries as decorative trophies, Hearst actually lived among his books. He read late into the night under the warm glow of brass lamps, marking pages and jotting notes in the margins. The air carried a faint scent of leather and aged paper, softened by the ever-present California breeze that drifted through open windows. The library served not only as a place for study, but as a bridge between Hearst's internal world and the sprawling physical creation he was building around him. It was here that ideas took shape, refined by the silence of centuries-old words. Nearby stood the billiard room, a space thick with atmosphere and stories. Heavy Gothic beams stretched across the ceiling, and the walls were draped with richly colored tapestries depicting hunting scenes and chivalric tales. The deep colors, the polished wood, and the glow of hanging lamps gave the room a sense of camaraderie and mischief. Movie stars, politicians, athletes, and writers gathered around the billiard tables, their laughter bouncing off the hard surfaces while the distant echo of animals from the surrounding hills floated through open doors. The room brought people together in a way few others did, offering a relaxed escape from the stricter rhythms of dinners and screenings. It was a space of friendly rivalries, whispered gossip, and spontaneous conversations, an engine of social energy within the estate. The gallery, by contrast, carried a quiet majesty. Positioned to capture maximum natural light, it stretched like a museum hall, filled with sculptures, paintings, and artifacts that spanned continents and centuries. Marble statues stood in serene poses along the walls. Renaissance tapestries hung beside medieval carvings. Oil paintings glowed softly in gilded frames, their colors deepened by the afternoon sun. Morgan designed the gallery as both a walkway and a moment of pause, a place where guests could slow down and let the weight of Hearst's collection settle over them. The room served as a bridge between the public spaces of the mansion and the more intimate corners, guiding visitors through a curated journey of culture and imagination. It reinforced the idea that the estate was not merely a home, but a living museum whose exhibits continued to grow, shift, and breathe. Each of these signature spaces contributed to the identity of Casa Grande, not only through design, but through function. Hearst's Gothic suite grounded the estate in personal introspection. Marion's rooms softened the mansion with warmth and humanity. The library enriched its intellect. The billiard room fueled its social pulse. The gallery elevated its artistic spirit. Together, they created a residence that operated like a cultural ecosystem, a place where ideas, emotions, and aesthetics flowed together in harmony. Long before the public ever set foot inside, the mansion already felt complete, as if it had been crafted not to impress, but to embody the full breadth of human experience. And with every room that came to life, the castle grew deeper and more layered, preparing for the rhythm of daily life that would soon fill its corridors with voices, footsteps, and stories carried from one century into the next. The rhythm of construction that had defined San Simeon for nearly 2 decades began to falter long before it fully stopped. What had once been a hilltop, alive with motion, stonecutters shaping marble, carpenters fitting beams, gardeners carving terraces into the slopes, slowly slipped into a strange and uneasy stillness. The Great Depression, sweeping across the country like a cold wind, reached even the highest towers of Casa Grande, and its arrival struck the estate with a force no blueprint or engineering plan could withstand. For years, Hearst had financed the expansion of the castle as though his resources were infinite. Money flowed into imported stone, commissioned artwork, rare ceilings, and the wages of hundreds of workers who lived in temporary villages along the mountain roads. The construction site had become a small community, bustling with activity from dawn until long after sunset. Every day brought new materials, new ideas, new revisions. Hearst dreamed faster than Morgan could draw, and the hill seemed willing to accommodate everything, until the economy outside the castle walls began to collapse. Newspaper circulation declined as families across America struggled to afford even basic necessities. Advertising revenue plunged. Investments that once seemed untouchable lost value. Hearst's empire, built on risk, expansion, and relentless acquisition, found itself strained under the weight of debts that had accumulated quietly during the Roaring Twenties. The castle, with its constant demands and enormous operating costs, became a symbol of extravagance at a time when the country was learning to live with less. Morgan and her team felt the pressure long before the final order came. Deliveries arrived later and less frequently, The once steady stream of new artifacts slowed to a trickle. Some work crews were quietly reduced in size, and although Hearst continued to speak about new wings, new terraces, and new additions, his tone carried a note of distraction, as though he were trying to outrun the reality he knew was closing in. He walked the construction site with a mix of pride and apprehension, pausing more often than before, looking at unfinished walls with the gaze of someone trying to freeze time. The breaking point arrived with a single message, an instruction sent across the estate in 1937 that felt more like a commandment than a memo. All work must stop. After nearly 3 decades of ceaseless expansion, the hammers, saws, and cement mixers fell silent. Workers set their tools down and stepped away from projects mid-progress. Half-built archways stood exposed to the sky. Stacks of marble destined for new floors and terraces waited in crates that would never be opened. Blueprints rolled across drafting tables like waves frozen at shorelines. The hilltop, accustomed to the constant heartbeat of construction, suddenly lost its pulse. The transformation was unsettling. For the first time since the project began, the estate felt hollow. Echoes replaced the noise of machinery. Corridors that once vibrated with footsteps became eerily quiet. The gardens, still beautifully maintained, seemed almost too perfect in their stillness, as though frozen in anticipation of activity that never came. Even the animals in the private zoo moved through the landscape with a more subdued energy, their surroundings strangely muted without the usual human presence. Morgan continued to visit the estate for a while, walking through its halls with plans in hand. Though she knew that most of the designs she carried would never come to life, she inspected foundations meant for wings that would remain forever unbuilt, noted the precise alignment of windows overlooking terraces that would never be completed, and stood before empty walls that waited endlessly for ceilings still sealed in warehouses. Her meticulous work, once animated by forward momentum, now felt suspended, beautiful, but paused mid-breath. As the decade wore on, the estate shifted gradually from a construction site to a place of quiet reflection. The unfinished elements of Casa Grande became part of its story rather than flaws. Guests who arrived during these years sensed the lingering ambitions in every corner, archways that hinted at future rooms, terraces that ended abruptly, and hallways leading into spaces that had been left untouched. The castle, once a symbol of unrestrained aspiration, now stood as a reminder of limitations even the most powerful could not escape. The passing years brought more challenges. Hearst's influence diminished, his financial hold weakened, and his days of commanding vast editorial empires began to wane. Yet the castle remained on the hill, an enormous and beautiful testament to everything he had attempted. It watched the world change from its vantage point above the Pacific, silent but enduring. And when the clouds of the Depression finally began to lift and the world transitioned into the uncertainties of the post-war era, the castle remained frozen in the shape it had taken during the final years of its creator's ambition. It had been built with the intention of never being finished, a project meant to grow for a lifetime. Now it stood complete and incomplete at once, a monument captured in mid-sentence. The silence that settled over San Simeon during these years did not mark an end, but a pause, a long exhale between eras. The next chapter of the castle's life would not be defined by construction, but by preservation, memory, and the slow transformation from private dream to public legacy. When Hearst's long chapter finally closed, the hilltop seemed to inhale and fall into a silence far heavier than anything it had known during the years of stalled construction. For the first time since the project began, Casa Grande stood without its guiding presence, a castle designed around the heartbeat of a single man, now forced to exist without the force that had animated every corner. The change was immediate and almost haunting. Rooms that had once glowed with conversation, laughter, and nightly rituals now echoed with a hollowness that felt unnatural for a place built to be lived in. The great assembly room, where guests once gathered beneath Renaissance ceilings, stood still beneath the same carved beams, yet the absence of voices gave the space an entirely different atmosphere. Dust settled gradually on the tapestries. Light filtered through tall windows, illuminating air rather than movement. The refectory, where long tables had once held lively meals, now hosted only the quiet hum of empty space. Even the billiard room, once a lively refuge of jokes and late-night games, felt muted, as if the walls were waiting for footsteps that never returned. Throughout the mansion, the private suites, galleries, and terraces retained their beauty, but without activity, they took on the air of a museum locked after hours. Hearst's Gothic bedroom remained in the perfect order, yet felt strangely distant, like a stage set waiting for a performance that would never come. Marian's rooms, once filled with color and warmth, lost their glow in the absence of her presence. The soft pastels and airy fabrics seemed to dim as the months passed. Every space was suspended in a strange stillness, as though time had thickened inside the walls. Outside, the changes were even more visible. The gardens, once meticulously cared for by teams of gardeners, began to struggle without the constant nurturing they required. Clipped hedges softened at the edges, citrus trees grew wilder, and flower beds lost their precise geometry. Seasonal blooms still appeared, carried by the rhythms of the land, but without careful tending, the artistry of the terraces slowly faded. The pathways, fountains, and staircases, designed to frame and guide the estate's dramatic views, became marked by creeping moss and shifting soil, subtle reminders that nature was reclaiming what had once been reshaped by human ambition. The private zoo, once the largest of its kind, faced an even more rapid transformation. Many of the exotic animals had been relocated by the time Hearst left San Simeon, but a surprising number remained for a while, watched over by a diminishing staff. Zebras continued to graze on the hills long after the social gatherings had ended, their silhouettes appearing at dawn and dusk like echoes of a more vibrant era. But without Hearst's resources and without a clear purpose, the zoo gradually dissolved. Fences deteriorated, feeding schedules changed, and eventually the collection dispersed entirely. The hills grew quiet again, save for the rustle of local wildlife returning to their former territory. Inside the house, early signs of structural decline appeared with a subtlety that concealed their urgency. Wooden beams expanded and contracted with changing humidity. Water seeped into cracks left unattended. Tiles loosened on terraces. Tapestries faded under unfiltered sunlight. None of the damage was catastrophic, but every small shift marked the beginning of a slow unraveling. A mansion of such scale required constant attention, and without it, even the strongest materials began to show vulnerability. Staff who remained did what they could. A skeleton crew maintained basic upkeep, sweeping floors, dusting furniture, tending to mechanical systems. But the estate had grown far beyond the capacity of a few hands. The distant hum of generators that once ensured the mansion's comfort grew irregular. Parts of the hilltop experienced power outages during storms. Plumbing, once state-of-the-art, began to falter. The immense infrastructure hidden beneath the floors and behind the walls no longer received the meticulous care that kept it running smoothly. By the early 1950s, the castle felt more like a relic than the vibrant enclave it had been. Mansion rooms remained furnished exactly as Hearst left them, frozen in a kind of respectful stasis. Yet the emotional energy that once filled the estate had dissipated. Visitors who arrived during these years described the atmosphere as eerie, beautiful, but tinged with melancholy. The castle seemed to grieve the loss of its creator, holding on to grandeur while retreating into quiet isolation. And yet, despite the decline, the structure endured. Its towers still rose proudly over the coastline. Its grand halls retained their majesty. Even in partial neglect, the estate's scale and artistry were impossible to ignore. The Enchanted Hill remained enchanting, even in stillness. But it was clear that without intervention, the slow decay would accelerate. A place built with such intensity of vision required stewardship equal in devotion, or it would eventually crumble under its own magnificence. As the years edged closer to the moment when the estate would be transferred to the state, San Simeon stood at a crossroads, a masterpiece suspended between memory and uncertainty, waiting for someone beyond Hearst's lifetime to decide whether it would fade into quiet ruin or rise again in a new form. The hilltop that had once pulsed with creativity now held only the quiet hope that another era might come to restore what time had begun to erode. When the estate finally passed into the hands of the state, it was meant to mark the beginning of a new chapter, a promise that the Enchanted Hill would be protected, preserved, and cherished for generations to come. But the transition was far from smooth. The state inherited not just a magnificent landmark, but a monumental responsibility. An aging fortress of 165 rooms, thousands of irreplaceable artifacts, decaying infrastructure, and a landscape slowly slipping back into wilderness. At first, the sheer scale of the estate overwhelmed the very institutions meant to safeguard it. In the early years after acquisition, maintenance was inconsistent at best. Staff unfamiliar with the castle's delicate ecosystems and highly specialized engineering made decisions that unintentionally accelerated deterioration. Antique woodwork suffered under poor climate control. Marble surfaces developed subtle stains from untreated water. Tapestries faded quickly when protective curtains were left open, exposing centuries-old fibers to relentless sun. Mechanical systems, intricate networks of pipes, ducts, and generators that had been carefully tended for decades, began to falter without expert oversight. Visitors, newly allowed onto the hill for tours, walked through corridors that still impressed, but no longer radiated the controlled elegance Hearst and Morgan had crafted. As these issues became evident, public concern rose rapidly. Newspapers published frustrated editorials lamenting the state's inability to maintain one of California's greatest cultural treasures. Preservationists sounded alarms about the risk of irreversible damage. Former employees of Hearst's estate spoke candidly about the delicate balance required to care for the mansion, a balance that had been disrupted. The public, long intrigued by the mythos surrounding the castle, began to understand that its survival was not guaranteed simply because it now belonged to the state. This growing concern sparked a wave of activism. Historians, architects, philanthropists, and art lovers came together to advocate for urgent intervention. Their efforts led to the formation of dedicated foundations focused on saving the estate from further decline. These organizations served as both watchdogs and collaborators, gathering donations, raising awareness, and pushing the state toward more responsible stewardship. Their most significant contribution was providing the expertise that traditional park services lacked: knowledge of historical preservation, artifact conservation, and the unique demands of maintaining a mansion that blended ancient materials with early modern technology. But preserving Hearst Castle was not only a matter of repairing damaged surfaces. Legal questions soon emerged around ownership and copyright of the vast collection of art and architectural fragments. Some pieces, acquired decades earlier under murky circumstances, required verification and documentation to ensure they could legally remain in the estate. The legal work was painstaking, researching provenance, confirming export permissions, and navigating disputes over intellectual property rights related to Morgan's architectural plans and Hearst's extensive correspondence. The castle was not just a physical structure. It was a repository of cultural artifacts whose status had to be clarified before restoration could move forward without risk of future challenges. Environmental concerns also complicated the restoration. The Neptune pool, which had once symbolized the glamour of Hearst's vision, was discovered to be leaking thousands of gallons of water per day, an unacceptable loss in a state increasingly conscious of drought and conservation. Fixing the problem required more than just sealing cracks. The entire pool had to be drained, dismantled, and rebuilt with modern waterproofing, all while preserving the integrity of the original design. New tiles had to be quarried from the same Vermont location as the originals, and artisans spent months reinstalling them in patterns identical to those laid nearly a century earlier. Inside the house, conservators faced equally demanding challenges. Fine art experts stabilized tapestries threatened by humidity and light exposure. Chemists developed treatments to protect centuries-old wood and stone from further decay. Teams of electricians rewired parts of the estate using modern safety standards while keeping Morgan's architectural vision intact. Roof repairs required new materials to match the originals, all installed with delicate precision to protect rooms below that housed priceless artifacts. Even the bat and lion populations living around the estate complicated certain projects, requiring ecologists to be involved to avoid disrupting local wildlife. Yet, despite the obstacles, the estate slowly began to regain its brilliance. Each completed project revealed another layer of the castle's original beauty. The gardens revived through careful restoration, reclaiming their geometric patterns and lush colors. The Roman pool's shimmering mosaic surfaces regained their celestial glow after intensive cleaning and conservation. Galleries and suites were restored to their former harmony, with lighting adjusted to highlight the artistry of their ceilings and decorative elements. As new tours were developed, visitors began to see not just the grandeur of the estate, but the complexity of the effort required to preserve it. The turning point came when a wave of restoration triumphs demonstrated what coordinated preservation could accomplish. Completed projects attracted national recognition, validating the work of the foundations and state teams. Grants and philanthropic contributions increased. The castle began to be seen not just as a relic of wealth, but as a cultural treasure deserving of meticulous protection. Awards acknowledged innovative restoration methods and successful partnerships between engineers, artisans, historians, and conservationists. By the time the estate had recovered from decades of neglect, it stood as both a monument to its creator and a tribute to those who fought to save it. The towers gleamed again in the sunlight, the fountains sang once more, the great rooms regained their vitality. And the Enchanted Hill, which had once teetered on the edge of decline, rose again as one of the most iconic landmarks in California, still holding the mystery, ambition, and intensity that characterized it from the beginning. Today, the Enchanted Hill stands not as a relic frozen in time, but as a living monument that continues to evolve, breathe, and gather meaning long after its creator's voice faded from its corridors. What was once the private dream of a single man has become a museum visited by millions, each person stepping into a world that still pulses with the grand ambition that shaped every stone. From a distance, the castle appears almost mythic, its towers rising above the mist, its terraced gardens unfolding like a story told in layers, its silhouette unchanged despite the passing decades. Yet its journey into the modern era was anything but inevitable. The estate had to earn its second life, and in doing so, it transformed from a personal sanctuary into a global cultural landmark. Visitors who travel the winding road from the base of the ranch land up to the hilltop, encounter the same breathtaking reveal that once greeted movie stars and presidents. The ocean stretches endlessly toward the horizon, casting silver reflections across the cliffs. The castle's façade, bathed in California light, displays an intricate tapestry of Mediterranean influences that Morgan interpreted with unmatched finesse. Walking through the courtyards, guests feel the blend of European grandeur and Californian openness that defines the estate, a balance of majesty and airiness that makes the buildings seem almost weightless despite their monumental form. Inside, rooms that once hosted intimate gatherings now serve as immersive historical exhibits. The Gothic suite remains precisely as Hearst arranged it, allowing visitors to glimpse the inner world of a man who chased a childhood vision until it became stone. Marion's suite, glowing with warm pastels and gilded mirrors, offers a quiet counterpoint, a space that softens the estate's imposing architecture with its sense of light and grace. The library, filled with thousands of volumes, reminds guests that Hearst valued ideas as deeply as spectacle. Each of these spaces invites reflection, creating the sensation that their inhabitants have stepped out only briefly and may return at any moment. The Roman pool, shimmering under a ceiling of mosaic constellations, stands as a testament to the restorers who reclaimed its brilliance after decades of wear. The Neptune pool, having undergone one of the most ambitious restorations in the history of California's historic preservation, now reflects the sky once more. Its marble terraces cleaned, its water tightened and conserved with modern engineering methods. These pools, once symbols of Hollywood luxury, now symbolize something deeper, a triumph of craftsmanship, dedication, and reverence for architectural heritage. The castle's influence extends far beyond its hilltop. Its architecture has inspired filmmakers, painters, designers, and writers for generations. Scenes from iconic films were shaped by its aesthetic, from the epic compositions of Spartacus to the surreal imagery used in modern music videos. The estate's synthesis of Gothic, Renaissance, Mediterranean, and Moorish elements has become a point of study in architecture schools, where students examine how Morgan created harmony out of eclecticism. Exhibits, documentaries, and scholarly work continue to explore the unusual partnership between Hearst and Morgan, highlighting the groundbreaking role she played at a time when female architects were almost unheard of. Preservation efforts have been recognized with major awards, including the Governor's Historic Preservation Award, acknowledging the visionary methods used to restore and reinterpret the estate for modern audiences. These initiatives have expanded beyond structural conservation, embracing new ways to engage visitors, digital exhibits, storytelling projects, guided panels, and research collaborations that weave together the threads of the estate's past and present. Thanks to these efforts, the castle is no longer simply observed. It is experienced, studied, and continuously rediscovered. Yet for all its global acclaim, the most compelling aspect of Hearst Castle's legacy lies in its emotional resonance. Standing on the edge of the terrace, gazing toward the Pacific, visitors often describe a quiet sensation, an awareness of the past hovering just at the edge of perception. The estate seems to hold on to memories as though the very walls absorbed them. Footsteps from long-vanished guests seem to linger in the tiled corridors. Light filtering through stained glass carries the faint warmth of evenings spent watching early Hollywood films in the private theater. The gardens, renewed and vibrant, feel like echoes of the ones that once dazzled visiting dignitaries. People often ask whether the spirit of Hearst still moves through the castle, not as a specter, but as a presence woven into the architecture itself. His ambition is etched into the carved beams. His sense of grandeur resonates in the long dining hall. His fascination with world culture lives in the tapestries and statues. His desire to build something enduring reverberates in the towers that have resisted storms, time, and silence. The castle does not feel haunted. It feels incomplete in a way that reflects Hearst's original belief that a dream should never be finished. It feels as though the estate is still reaching, still expanding, still imagining the next chapter, even when no new stones are being set. And so, the Enchanted Hill endures, a creation born from childhood wonder, shaped by decades of collaboration, nearly lost to decline and brought back to life through collective devotion. It stands today as a museum, a testament, and a living narrative carved into the California sky. Its halls whisper stories not just of luxury and art, but of persistence, preservation, and the strange, powerful hope that something built with imagination can outlast its maker. As visitors walk back down the hill at the end of their tour, many glance over their shoulders for one last look at the towers rising into the sun. In that moment, the castle seems to watch them in return, silent, timeless, and still cradling the dream of the boy who once stood on this land and decided to build forever.